Why nobody stops Israel. Israel acts against the international community's political will due to U.S. support and UN ineffectiveness when there is no consensus. The UN Security Council resolution calling for urgent and extended humanitarian pauses and corridors in Gaza for a sufficient number of days to allow full, rapid, safe, and unimpeded access for UN agencies and their partners this week reflects international outrage over Israel's military response to Hamas October 7 attack. The resolution is binding, but nothing assures it. As in the past, when Israel was asked to stop colonizing Palestinian territory, the international community cannot force its will on Israel. Why? Josep Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, said Friday in Ramallah, West Bank, that what is happening in Gaza is the consequence of a political and moral failure of the international community, which has theoretically supported a two-state solution for decades without doing what it should have to make it a reality. Borrell claimed that the Israeli and Palestinian people are paying a high price for this failure. This generic remark has specific implications for Israel, the main force in the conflict and occupying power. According to Borrell, the U.S. contributed to the collective failure. Washington, with its military assistance and Security Council veto power, is the sole entity with actual sway over Israel. So understanding Israel's margin for action is crucial. European nations are also responsible, but less so due to their limited impact on Israel. The UN's institutional design and the U.S. position as a hegemonic power prevent it from being effective in security matters without consensus. This is why large majorities in the General Assembly and Security Council have condemned Israel's actions, but this political will has had no real consequences. Washington has occasionally allowed resolutions that have been painful for its friend, but it has never put significant pressure on humanitarian pauses, colonization halts, or Palestinian state building. Dear viewers, welcome to BoltTech. Please kindly like, subscribe, and leave a comment in the comment section. Hamas' brutal attack granted Israel the right to self-defense in the current dilemma. This is done through war crimes like collective punishment, which is causing great misery. Despite international pressure, Israel continues to assault and isolate the Gaza Strip, allowing only a small amount of food, water, and gasoline to pass. Israel's excesses and abuses in its legitimate security efforts are nothing new. Here are some hints and statistics to investigate foreign actors' leverage over Israel's conduct and why they have not used it more. Protection of the U.S. The U.S. decades-long backing and protection of Israel is essential to understanding its history. Whether for genuine political and moral convictions, wanting to defend a safe home for the people who suffered the most tremendous persecution in human history, domestic political reasons, considering the Jewish community's significant influence on American politics, or strategic interests in the region, given that several Arab countries have allied themselves with the former USSR and faced Iran since the establishment of strong military aid and UN political cover. Their partnership has seen ups and downs. The U.S. has vetoed many UN initiatives against Israel, but it has often let its ally down out of frustration. Resolution 2334, passed under Barack Obama, had a major impact on Israeli colonialism. The U.S.-approved resolution this week, which does not denounce Hamas, is another strong warning. In other cases, the U.S. has bilaterally or publicly criticized Israeli actions, and non-evident U.S. pressure has had substantial regional effects. However, Washington has never given or allowed a decisive push to end the occupation, colonization, establishment of a Palestinian state, or military campaigns that might have been even more brutal without its actions, but have caused atrocious civilian suffering, and, according to many experts, abundant war crimes. Israel's biggest military ally, the U.S., has the most influence. Given its influence over Israel, the U.S. might make this help effective by imposing constraints. Washington's abundant and high-quality backing has made Israel a regional military force for decades. Washington promises to give Israel $38 billion in military funding over the next decade under the 2016 MOU. This is around twice the annual defense budget of Spain, which is significantly larger than Israel in population and economy. When adjusted for inflation, U.S. taxpayer military aid to Israel may surpass $300 billion. Quantity is huge, but quality matters. The U.S. actively pursues a policy to ensure Israel's qualitative advantage over its enemies. Israel was the first country to get the world's most modern F-35 fighter fighters, and the U.S. funded and built Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile defense system. The U.S. supporting UN sanctions for unlawful colonization is unthinkable. What if the delivery of F-35s and Iron Dome parts was contingent on a colonization freeze or a humanitarian stop in Gaza? Europe consented. While Borrell blames the U.S. for the collective failure, Europe also contributed. The EU as a group and individual state positions affect each other but have their own paths. For lack of geopolitical or military might, the EU lacks key influence levers. The EU is Israel's top trading partner. 28% of Israel's exports were to EU countries last year. This is not a critical arsenal supplier, but it is noteworthy. South African apartheid fell under massive diplomatic, commercial, cultural, and media pressure. The EU is having trouble expressing consensus on this topic. A late October UN General Assembly resolution calling for a humanitarian truce passed with 120 votes in favor, 45 abstentions, and 14 against, including Israel and the US. Some EU countries voted in favor, others against, and others abstained. Germany's Nazi heritage paralyzes the dominant European power on this problem. Collaboration with Nazi Germany weighs Italy down. France has Europe's largest Jewish community and is the EU's second largest power. The EU has never taken considerable action to influence Israel due to the caution of key countries and internal differences. Even labeling products from occupied and colonial territories is challenging. Over Putin's 2 decades in power, Russia, a Eurasian power, has grown closer to Israel. Russia has never had the influence of Western nations, but this rapprochement with Israel has slowed progress. This is changing as Moscow and Tehran become closer. Time will reveal the results. Ineffectiveness of the UN. The UN's capacity to implement policy pronouncements with overwhelming support is affected by this political reality. The UN deploys peacekeeping missions -12 with 90,000 troops and imposes sanctions, which are powerful tools of pressure but limited in their effectiveness. In the 2005 World Summit conclusions, the UN embodied the concept of responsibility to protect, which states have the duty to protect their populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, and the international community has the duty to protect peoples from such crimes peacefully. In this context, we are prepared to take collective action in a timely and decisive manner if peaceful means fail and national authorities fail to protect their populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, the article states. The principle has been used in international crises like Libya. Some analysts argue that it does not apply to the Gaza conflict because nations must safeguard their populations and Gazans do not compare to Israel. Others believe Israel is accountable for the Strip's inhabitants because the UN considers it occupied. Any administrative action required political will, which has never been available, especially given the US's strong Security Council security for its partner. The Israeli-Palestinian issue is multifaceted and leads to different political views. Both sides have major duties. As occupying power, Israel has duties. The EU considers Hamas a terrorist organization, but a democracy should have morals. World leaders have called several of its practices illegal, and many experts believe it is committing war crimes. After Palestine joined the International Criminal Court a few years ago, investigations have commenced and decisions may be due in the next years. Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute, hence there are no court judgments on these matters. In the interim, Israel's actions, whether justified or not, have only been feasible due to the U.S. active support and the UN's executive incompetence.